Hey everyone, it's Dylan from the Black Forest Wood Company. This week we're working on a custom shuffleboard that our client down in Arizona commissioned us to build. Specifically, this was for Forum Fi, which is an interior design firm, so big shout out to them for trusting us with this process. The wood species selected for this was Canadian black walnut, and they did want a river that's going down the middle, so what we're doing first here is cutting off this big arm or this big branch that came out because it was going to create a challenging layout when we split this slab and face the live edges in. And then once we've got that ripped off, we can begin working on debarking all the outside edges of the slab. If you've watched our channel for any time, you know that that's a very important part of the process, but if this is one of your first times watching, that is so important because it affects the strength of the bond in the final product. If you don't remove your bark, the epoxy is just going to bond to the bark, and then the only thing holding your table together is the bond between the bark and the slab of wood itself, which is almost always eventually going to fail. So once that bark has been taken off, we get the slab onto our Avid CNC machine, and then we can begin flattening the slab. This is an important part of the process when you're doing a resin pour because it's going to eliminate the amount of resin you waste and allow your slab to sit perfectly flat in the mold. Then once we've got it flattened, we're cleaning up that section where we ripped off that branch just to make sure we don't have any jagged or straight cut edges, and all we do here is an angle grinder and then a little bit of sanding to clean that all up. Then we can get the slabs upstairs into our pour room and begin mixing up the resin for the first pour on this shuffleboard. This is going to be one of 3 pours that we're doing for this piece because we have to ensure that the slab is fully encapsulated in a block of epoxy to ensure that we get no movement in the final product. So for this first pour, we're using a lot of our Black Forest pigments. It's been a blend of a couple colors here, and the reason we've put so much is because this client wanted the opaque color. They wanted something really concentrated and really vibrant, so we just kept adding pigment until we couldn't see through anymore. This is using our Black Forest deep resin, and the product will take 7 days to cure, so we have to wait for that to take place, and then after that we can get it demolded. Once it is cured, everything comes out quite easily. We coat our pieces in tuck tape for the outside, and then they're just constructed from MDF, and the bottom surface is constructed from HDPE, which also allows the epoxy to release really easily without any release agent. After we've flattened the piece, we can then put it through our thickness sander to just clean up that milled surface. We still do have our brand new machine on the way from SCM. I believe it's been pushed back a little bit, but that is going to greatly speed up our process of flattening. Once we've got the piece sanded and we have the surfaces all cleaned up, it's back into the mold so that we can pour a layer of resin on the bottom of this piece. As I mentioned earlier, we need to encapsulate this entire slab to minimize the amount of movement we get because this is going to be the playing surface of the shuffleboard. And as you can imagine, that needs to be perfectly smooth, and if you get any expansion or contraction that's showing up in the surface from wood movement, it's really going to affect the playing experience. And if I'm being honest, we don't have any scientific method that we're going off of here to construct this. We've just built one of these before, and we had to fix it once, and since we fixed it, we haven't had a callback. The first time we built one of these, we skipped this step. We didn't add the excess layer of resin, and it warped, like I described, sort of messing up the playing experience. And it's been about 2 years since we fixed the piece and added the layer of epoxy, and since then it's been absolutely perfect for our client. So now it's back downstairs through the sander again so we can flatten off that side, and then we'll flip the piece over to the other exposed surface to begin laying out for the playing marks. So we put the piece onto our CNC machine, and it's going to route out some grooves that we will later inlay with brass that's going to lay out how the points are scored on the shuffleboard. Once the CNC machine has done its work, we can begin sanding this piece up before we put our bevel on the outside edge. So something a little bit different here is this piece is getting beveled before it gets encapsulated in that block of epoxy because we want it to look like a finished product in the pour. We don't usually do our final sanding before resin pours, but this case was a little different. Then once our sanding is done, we're using some epoxy and some PL400 to adhere the brass strips into the piece of wood. And once all of that is done, we can do the third and final pour for this piece. So this is the layer that's going to end up being our playing surface in the end, and it's going on the outside edges as well because we want there to be absolutely zero exposed wood to the outside air, all in an effort to minimize the amount of expansion and contraction we get. While we're waiting for the resin to cure on that piece, we can begin working on the rest of the structure for the shuffleboard. And we'll go through it pretty quickly, but the frame is just going to get assembled with a simple rabbet around the outside, and it's going to be made from a matching walnut material that you're seeing us do for the legs. So these legs are going to get a finger joint done on the edge, and again, this is all just in an effort to increase the gluing surface area and get a stronger joint. Now, we're already using Titebond 3, so not necessary, but why not when you have the equipment? It's kind of fun. It's like having a fast car and not testing it out and driving it. Why would you do that? Once the pieces are glued up and cured, it's through the thickness sander again just to get that excess layer of glue off and take them down to the final thickness that we want. We're also getting some custom plates made to fasten these legs to the underside of the shuffleboard. You'll get to see how those look later, but they do go on to the front surface of these legs because we want this top to be as stable as possible. Again, all in an effort to try and eliminate the amount of impact we have on the playing experience. Once the legs are done, we can begin applying our Black Forest furniture oil to all the surfaces of these pieces. These are different than the actual playing surface itself in that it's getting an absolutely natural finish where all of the wood grain is exposed, whereas that playing surface is fully encapsulated and you're going to feel no wood grain. We're applying the exact same finish to the frame as we did to the legs. So typically we usually do 2 coats. All you need for protection with our furniture oil is 1 coat because it is a monocoat oil, but to increase the sheen and get more of a semi-gloss finish, you can add a 2nd coat. Beneath the playing surface, we're doing a blackened ash support, and it's just going to be attached to this with threaded inserts. So in order to ensure that we get a very strong joint, we mill all these pieces to their rough size. They go onto the CNC machine to get a finger joint, which just increases the gluing surface area and gives us something a little bit stronger. It's probably overkill, honestly, but we usually like to go overkill with our pieces. Once the piece is sat in the clamps for 24 hours, we use a belt sander to take off some of those large areas of glue, and from there we can begin laying out where we'll attach the playing surface onto this piece. Once we've laid out where we want the playing surface to go, we can begin routing out for our threaded inserts that are going to attach this onto that surface. The reason we're not gluing or permanently fastening anything here is because we do want the ability to be able to take this off and put it back on should we ever need to make any adjustments on the piece. Hypothetically, there is a chance in some extreme scenario that this piece could warp somewhat. So in that event, we could loosen these threaded inserts, put some shims underneath, tighten them back down, and it would hopefully slightly bend that surface more into the playing surface you want for a shuffleboard. Once all of the threaded inserts have been installed, we can begin sanding this piece prior to applying the blackened stain. We like to use the General Finish water-based wood stain for our black projects. We find it does the most even job of achieving a black color, and it gives the least amount of issues in terms of overlap while you're doing the staining process. The only caveat with this finish is that since it's water-based, it's very important to make sure that everything is fully cured before you go and put any type of oil-based top coat over this. So we end up usually waiting about a week after it's been stained before we put our oil over top. And now begins the polishing process for our playing surface. So this is a very labor-intensive, tedious part of the process, but it does ensure that we get the most beautiful, best-looking piece as possible. So we begin at 120 grit, working our way through those grits, going in order. So we go 120, 150, 180, 220, 320, 400, 600, 800, 1000, 2000, and then 4000. That's just the sanding. From there, you have 3 stages of polishing. So if a client wants a polished surface on something like this, it adds greatly to the cost just simply because of the amount of extra labor that's associated. But I cannot lie, it does look absolutely incredible as a finished product. But you guys are going to have to wait until the end of the video to see this piece all polished up and assembled. Once all the finish on the pieces is cured, we can begin our assembly process. So we're screwing this blackened ash surface into the underside of our frame, and we're going to plug those holes up afterwards. And then we can begin adding our final brass inlays that we had taped off before. So these splines that you see going into the outside corners, typically they would be structural to increase the strength of a joint, but ours are purely for aesthetics. Here's also the plate I mentioned earlier. So while it looks like brass, it's constructed from solid steel and then was sprayed by Gecko with their brass Verametal finish to give us this look of brass, and it significantly reduces on the cost for an item on the table that really doesn't get seen that much. Then once that part is completed, we can lift the legs into the recesses on the underside, get all hands on deck to safely flip that over, and then the final part of the process is lifting in that playing surface onto the blackened ash. In recap, we've constructed this shuffleboard using Canadian black walnut, black forest deep resin, blackened ash, and brass. We've combined all this to encapsulate the slab in our resin to give us a perfectly smooth playing surface. We've polished everything up to a high gloss finish, and as a final layer of protection, we added a coat of our black forest ceramic to eliminate the amount of scratching that we get on that playing surface. This piece is getting shipped down to Forum 5 for their client in Arizona, so we hope that they enjoy it, and you guys can follow them on their social media to see some photos of this in its finished space. And if you guys made it all the way to the end of the video and you think we deserved it, we really appreciate a like, a comment, or a subscription. Thank you guys, and we'll see you next week. So I thought that was the end of the video, but we took a lot of clips here to really give you guys a good look at every single angle of these pieces. So I hope it's enough. I hope you guys enjoyed, and I've ran out of things to say, so enjoy the shuffleboard.